Hello, everybody. My name's Hugh and Sara. I'm the manager of Film Hub NI, and welcome to episode 5 of the Moving Pictures podcast series. Film Hub NI is part of the Film Audience Network, which is funded by the BFI through National Lottery funds to develop audiences for independent cinema across the UK. And we're delighted, I am delighted to be joined by my partner in crime, Sarah Gunn-Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. How you doing?
Can you remember your job title?
Yes, I am indeed
very well.
the marketing and audiences officer at Film Hub NI.
Excellent. Well, tell us more about Moving Pictures then.
Yes, certainly. Yes, everybody, you're welcome to this podcast. This is episode 5, as you said. So hard to believe we've come this far. And first of all, I should say thanks to Northern Ireland Screen, who have supported this programme through the Department for Communities. And what we really wanted to do is, while our primary job is to support audiences going to actual physical cinema spaces, obviously at the minute that can't be possible and things have moved on somewhat. What we are doing now with these podcasts and some training and mentoring is allowing our film exhibitors to find out a bit more about how to showcase work online, how to evaluate it, how to program it. And these podcasts can be accessed standalone. If on our website, there's a list of all the podcasts. So you can dip into the marketing one or to this one or listen to them all over and over again if you wish. And they'll also be available captioned on our YouTube channel as well.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So this edition focuses on of the Moving Pictures programs. Is focusing on evaluation. Now, friends, when I first got this job 7 or 8 years, long years ago, I was not a believer in evaluation. I believed that the instinctive knowledge of experienced film managers and arts events people and all that sort of stuff would simply, make things go right. But I am here today to tell you that I have been converted.
You used to hate data. You actively used to say, I hate data. I don't want to hear about it. And I would have to deal with the data.
Well, I think you're wrong, Hugh. I think, Hugh, you were perfectly right. So thank you very much for listening and see you next week. Bye.
But I have been converted, and I have been converted because I have seen it in action, but I've also realized that data and analysis and evaluation are part of the same tree as much as programming, as much as marketing, and as much as experience management and all the elements that bring together into great cinema and great events management. So I am delighted to be joined by two people who have really kind of contributed a huge amount to both Northern Ireland's understanding of evaluation, but also the wider Film Audience Network. So hello to Andi Ray from Film Hub Midlands. Hello.
Hi, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining the podcast. And also hello to Andi Jarvis from Eximo Marketing. Hello, Andi Jarvis.
Hello, and thank you for having me as well. A double Andy is what you've got today.
A double Andy. Yeah, we're gonna do Andy J and Andy R for the purposes of this. How are you both? How's it going? How are you, Andy R?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. It's freezing cold, but.
Just to prove that Northern Ireland is clearly better than the Midlands, despite me not being a native, it's absolutely boiling here today.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
For February, anyway. It's almost double figures, which is why I've got my T-shirt on.
Positively balmy, as we might say. Well, I mean, let's not hold it. It's usually the other way around. So I've been in Birmingham many times, and it's been warm. So this is a discussion of evaluation, discussion of the possibility of evaluation and things like that. So I thought it might be interesting to start off just in terms of maybe asking you to describe what we mean by collecting data and what we mean by evaluation. So Andy R, from a Film Audience Network perspective, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think if we ask what is valuation in a broad sense and what it is about collecting data, it's really understanding, have we met our objectives? What are we trying to achieve? And we're making a judgment about, have we made an impact? What is that impact? What it is we're doing? What are we trying to do? Have we done it? And then improving and learning and making things better. Mm-hmm. I'm aware that's so incredibly vague and kind of blue sky and abstract and kind of all the rest of it. But for most kind of fan members and for people showing films, really evaluation, they'll see evaluation as it's about collecting box office data, and it's about surveying their audiences, it's about online analytics, and it means those kind of things to them and talking to their audiences, I think above all else, and trying to learn and understand and do things better and kind of check, are we actually doing what we're trying to do? Yeah, and it's about achieving. And there are kind of all these multi dimensions, because all that data and information then cascades upwards. It comes to the film hubs, and it goes to the BFI. Hopefully, at some point, goes to the government, and we all iterate and improve and learn together. But yeah, I think simplified, I kind of think about it as three things: about like, are people watching your films? Who are those people, and are they coming back? That's kind of the three loops of evaluation for me a lot of the time.
Well, that does simplify it and makes it quite understandable, actually, because I think it is quite a scary word for a lot of people. Even, I mean, when I started this job, I was 20 years doing events management and stuff like that, and I'd always kind of tried to avoid evaluation, because I think it wasn't clear what the steps were, but what the benefits were. So Andi J, maybe you could speak to that, just in terms of what the benefits of evaluation can be for small organizations, but large ones as well.
I think the key thing to remember is almost a mindset change, is to think of evaluation and data as making your life easier. And think of it in those terms. And it is difficult. If you think of an event, if you're watching the video, you'll see me drawing kind of a pyramid with my finger. But if you think of an event as there's a lot of effort goes in to this peak to achieve, which is the event taking place, there's hours goes into whether it's just a screening or whatever it is you're doing. There's a huge amount of work goes in, and then you get there, and the easiest thing in the world to do is just to switch off and go, oh, thank goodness that's done, and we'll just move on to the next one. But if you actually, and it's more of a cliff edge, but if you come down the other side of the pyramid and evaluate, you actually start the next event at a slightly higher place than you left. I'm maybe not drawing the picture as well as I hoped, but what you're doing, but by doing that evaluation, and I'm a marketer and I come at things through a marketing lens, and every film club, organization, cinema, whoever I've worked with has always had the same problem. How do we get more people watching our films? And you do that through data and evaluation. You've done all the effort to bring someone to the show. Why let them walk out the door and never contact them again? Because they're now warm. They know you. They like you. They appreciate what you're doing. So put that extra bit of effort into the evaluation in the data stage, because it makes the next one easier. And I suppose the flywheel is maybe a concept, but it's hard to start pushing it at first. But once you start to get that momentum with it, it just starts to turn on its own and keep you going. So marketing for events and for cinema is much like that with a flywheel. If you just keep pushing it and letting it stop, it takes the same amount of effort every time to get it turning. If you can get that turning and keep it going, it becomes a machine that will help put bums on seats for you. And you only get it turning that way by you doing the evaluation section. So that's why it's key to me.
I mean, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to take it right back. So we've been talking about what we can do with the data and stuff. I just wanted to mention how, or ask how we actually get this information in the first place. Andi R, I will come to you first. Any of our fan members who are listening will possibly be traumatized by long paper surveys that we get shouted at about, but are actually very useful. And I know a lot of work has been done on that in the last few years to kind of streamline that process. Obviously, if we're talking about online work, it's difficult. It's more difficult to get information from people, but there probably are some easier ways in terms of booking systems and all that. One of the things I know that a few people have been mentioning to us is, how will you ever know how many people are in a room watching something? That's, there's some things we will never be able to find out. But how do organizations actually access this through the platforms they use?
Yeah, this is changing a lot now, because as you said, when we had people in a cinema room and we were getting them in the same room, we can count how many people are in the room, how many tickets we've sold, and we can, quite, I say easily, but we can survey those people by, either asking them at the door or, clipboarding them, or by giving them paper surveys, or sending them the email link afterwards, which a lot of people do. That's kind of maybe the old world now. Hopefully we'll come back to that, doing that kind of work again in the future. But online, this has completely changed. kind of how we're measuring these things and how we're collecting data on them. In some ways, as you say, it's easier because there's so much more out there. There's so much more automatically done, doing kind of people online, kind of online tracking and stuff like that. But we do lose that kind of easy, I keep saying easy, it's not easy, it's simple, but this kind of audience surveying, that's harder than ever probably, and kind of getting people to kind of fill out those online, kind of get their attention and pull them back is more difficult.
And the anecdotal sort of stuff, I think, is probably lost a bit. Yeah,
massively, because that's the main thing people actually learn. It's not through audience surveys or data a lot of time. It's actually by talking to their audiences and, did you like that or not? And kind of having that box office presence is always still the most valuable thing for, I think, anyone showing films. So when that's gone, it's harder. It's much harder. So we're kind of looking at, people talking to you via social media and kind of messaging and that kind of thing instead. That's the hope.
Yeah, but it's difficult to quantify, and it's maybe not as high quality engagement. Fair to say,
yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
One thing I wouldn't worry too much about is, someone's bought access to this, how many people are in the room. Newspapers have been making up readership figures for at least 60 or 70 years, where for every one newspaper sold, 4 people read it. And, the rigor behind that number may well have been there in 1957 when it was first introduced, or whenever it was. But now they're still using a broadly similar system. So I think the thing about understanding what you can collect and what you can use, and then sort of working back from there, there is no way we can accurately quantify how many people are going to be sat on that sofa watching. So let's not worry about it too much unless we can try and capture that. So let's worry about what can we capture. And I think that the move to online has made some things easier because people are signing up and giving you an email address when they're signing up to things. You have a discourse with them in a way that if someone's coming in late, they just want to get a seat. They've seen a friend who they haven't seen for 6 weeks. They just want to move in, go over and chat to them, not stand and be clipboarded on the way in. And, we have a different medium, which can make evaluation not easier, but it can certainly make the quantitative stuff, the number-based stuff, easier to do. And Andy's absolutely right. You miss someone coming up to you at the box office and going, this event would be lovely if you did this, or I really had, that was the best night I've had in years. You miss that. You miss the qual, but we can probably get the quant a little bit easier. Getting surveys out to people. You can do stuff beforehand as well to sort of warm people up and go, we'll be doing a post-event survey. Please keep looking out for that. And to warm your audience up a little bit before they get that, to try and get the numbers up. So in theory, some things should be easier by being forced online. So I think it's about worrying about what we can control. I know I'm in danger of starting to speak management nonsense and go, well, control the controllables. But I think the thing with any evaluation is almost start with the end in mind. What are we going to do with this information? And that helps you decide what are you going to capture. And then you can work with the medium that you've got. So, don't try and replicate what you would do in person online, but actually you can get a lot of powerful stuff online.
I mean, in terms of the platforms and the information that the platforms are sort of collecting already, for a lot of people, Google Analytics or what you can find out through Facebook or Twitter and those kind of things, are they still useful? I find them very difficult to navigate myself, and the dictionary of terms is kind of like a new language in terms of what is a user and what is a viewer and what are all these kind of different things. Is that to a small community cinema, for example, is that still a useful way of finding out information? Andy Ray, maybe you've looked at this.
Yeah, absolutely, it's still useful. Those kind of things are when we, as Andy J said, like we shouldn't try and replicate the things, but we need to change. We need to change how we're doing and how we're learning. So that stuff is still so immensely useful, but it's also kind of dangerous because there's so much of it, and there's so much of it. There's so much noise a lot of the time, and I think that's kind of one of the problems is that we have noise and no signal, and it's kind of dangerous. People kind of. We like to, we come up with these ideas and then we'll go in search of data to go justify them and say, this is the way things are going. And we can always do that if we're collecting data across you know, 5 different platforms, we can do that. I can always find data just justify anything, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of actually being a bit more selective and not inclusive about what you're kind of selecting, but thinking, as Andy said, thinking about the end, and maybe avoiding the vanity. I think I have this term for kind of vanity metrics, of kind of things that make us feel better, but actually maybe are meaningless a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I think it's one of the things the pandemic has taught me is that if you want to find evidence to back up your case, you know, spend enough time on Google, you will find it, or you know, you look and you interpret a set of data this way and different ways and things like that. I remember the first time looking at kind of Facebook or something like that and go, wow, loads of people in South Africa love our work, and you know, that sort of stuff. It's kind of, you know, and then applying to the South African government for money, but it didn't work. But but there is a sense that vanity matrix is very interesting. Sorry, Andy J, you wanted to jump in there.
No, I think you're right in that it can be difficult to navigate those things. So, and all the platforms often count things ever so slightly differently. So if you're showing videos on Facebook, for example, they show a view. I think it's 3 seconds of somebody watching a video is counted as a view. Most normal people wouldn't class someone engaging with a video for 3 seconds as being particularly useful to know. Not if it's a 10-minute video or a 5-minute video. You know, if it's a 6-second video, then maybe, I don't know. But I think on YouTube, I think it might be 10 seconds. And again, I say think because I'm not entirely sure, but I am pretty certain they use a different metric to measure what a video view is. So you can even be looking at the same thing and go, oh, we had 2,000 views on YouTube and we had 4,000 views on Facebook. So we should put more effort into Facebook. But what you might have is 4,000 people watching 3 seconds going, nah, this is shit. So, you know, the metrics are useful and interesting. But I do think, you know, before you're going to go down that rabbit hole, it is worth stepping back a little bit and watching a few YouTube videos on basics of Facebook metrics. And, you know, there's no point trying to cover it in here, but there are videos, and always look for videos that are sort of the last 6 to 9 months, because lots of things do change. But just to get an understanding of what's there in the platform. But, you know, we've said it a few times, look for the metrics that will start with the end in mind and look for the metrics that will help with that, not the metrics that will help you go, don't we look fantastic? Because actually a lot of the time what you need to do is work out what's not working and tweak and improve that, as well as knowing what's working and doing more of that. But don't just look for things that support how wonderful you are, because then you just end up, you know, it's a bit of an awkward bubble that you find yourself in.
And it's setting a baseline as well, isn't it? I know, you know, organizations, not any of our members, but people like, oh, we don't bother tracking it. We know we're doing well. Well, how do you know you're doing well? If you've no baseline and you've nothing to measure it from, then even if you're starting from zero, I know, you know, there will be people listening that are maybe just thinking about doing this online stuff now, and they're literally starting from zero in terms of figuring out how many people will interact with films or with that. And it's just better to start somewhere than nowhere, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Sorry, Hugh. Sorry, I was going to say, I think the thing with data capture is, I know an evaluation, it scares some people. So if you're scared about it and you've stayed away from it, just start small and build from there. But if you have that approach of, what are we going to do with this? You know, is it because you want to put more bums on seats? Is it that you have to send a submission back to people like you and BFI and, you know, sort of onwards to government? So start off with a pen and paper. And like, what do we need? What are the objectives we're trying to achieve? What do we need this for? And then what do we think we'll need to do, you know, to go from there? So if it's in marketing terms, you want a name, an email address, and do you need the postcode? Is that important to you at the minute? You know, because the less data you ask for people, the more likely they are to give it to you. So it's just about starting with the end in mind, understanding what you need it for, and then starting to collect the basics of that. Because once you do that, you can then start to build on it. Because if you wait until you need it and you're like, oh, right, we've got this big event coming up now, we'd love to have a database of 500 people we could email to tell them about. Have we got it? No. I wish we'd have started it during the pandemic. You know, now's the time to start.
So in a way, it's about having objective-driven data. So your collection of data is tied to an objective as opposed to just collecting some data.
Yeah, I think if you're just doing let's just collect it because we were told we have to collect data, or we were told we have to do evaluation. If you do that, you end up with bits of paper that's sat in a box. You end up with a database over here, a database over there. So, and nobody really knows what you've got, and you don't use it. And it's that mindset thing I talked about right at the beginning. It's just, we're doing this because we have to, instead of we're doing this because it'll make our lives easier. And if you approach it from that sense, this will make our lives easier, then you'll be flying. I
mean, I think one of the important things is once you've got data, once you've actually got it, what do you then do with it? I mean, is there, I don't know which of you wanted to speak to this, but like, is there a way of is there a step-by-step process that you should go through to try to understand what you've got? Or is it just setting it against objectives? Or is it a wider sort of system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the common thing for us to have this kind of wide range approach to collecting as much as we can, as Andy J says, and sometimes not having a question, and that does end up leaving you with lots and lots of stuff, but not really knowing what it pertains to, and not having it very useful. And we're humans. We operate on incentives, and if we don't have an incentive to actually use this stuff well, we don't use it. It does sit in a box. It sits in a spreadsheet. It sits in some database, and it slowly gets bigger and older and more unwieldy. So it's kind of hard to kind of think, how do we actually use it? So we end up not doing it. But I do always come back to that kind of objectives. What are we trying to achieve? But what are we trying to learn? Do we have an actual question? And that's often what it is. Like simple questions a lot of the time, like, are people coming back? Are we doing any kind of retention and that kind of thing? And they're kind of asking questions and like that, and then seeing, do we have data that actually supports that, or can we find out that? And then if not, how do we capture that? And kind of moving in that cycle, really. And it's often about that. And I mean, Andy mentions the marketing behind this, because that's really the most useful place that this stuff sits a lot of the times. How can we market better? How can we kind of reach people better and improve their experience a lot of the time?
Yeah. I was just going to pick up on that there in terms of the setting of objectives and about being realistic about objectives, specifically when we're talking about film, online, excuse me, platforms and paid for content and stuff like that. Because I know certainly that nobody's going to retire. We've said this loads of times. Nobody's going to retire off showing films online, and well, some people might, but
Mr. Netflix presumably
yes,
will do all right out of it.
Netflix and old Jeff Bezos will be grand, but cinemas and stuff are, it's an alternative income stream, but it's never going to be a sole income stream. And I just wanted to ask what your feelings were about sharing data in terms, like, obviously thinking about GDPR in terms of kind of base data. Do you think that's a good thing if there was a couple of community cinemas that were running stuff online, if they could be sharing kind of, similar data between themselves to see what works and stuff like that? Andy,
so from a GDPR perspective, you have to be really careful on that. I think that hands up first, I'm not legal, but as a general point of view, you can only use data for the explicit reasons you've collected it. And once you start to get into sharing it between organizations and things, it can be on very woolly ground, especially personal identifiable information. So I think you'd have to be careful with that. I think if you were to be clear, and if you got together at the very start and said organization A, B, and C are collecting this data to do X, Y, and Z with it, and you said that from the start, I believe, always check with your legal services first, but I believe that would be okay. But if you just have data that you then want to offer to somebody, it gets you onto very sort of murky ground with that. I think what you can do is look at supporting each other if there are things you're doing that are not in competition with each other. So if you're known for screening documentaries and someone else is showing a great documentary, as long as you're not selling the database access and things, you can say, look, we're supporting organization B, they're screening this wonderful documentary on Thursday night. We would like you to go and see that. That way of sort of showing support and getting together. And if you take a step back and you are analyzing your data and sharing the sort of overall points of, we get 23% of our audience comes back every time.
Yeah.
Most of the people who watch our actually have visited the cinema. Sharing that information on an anonymized basis with another organization, perfectly fine. It's that bit where you get into sharing personalized data, just really, it's very woolly ground if you haven't really been clear at the start. I think, Andy, you might have something else on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think of like if you're sharing kind of personal data like that, like now things like an address and people's name and people's email address, we should treat these things like credit card numbers. We wouldn't share people's credit card numbers with each other. We just wouldn't do it. So if we kind of apply that kind of mental sense to it, very quickly people think, oh, actually, maybe we should be protective and not kind of share this stuff unless we ask that permission. But top line stuff and approaches, I think that's how we can benefit from sharing. Definitely learn together.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly a sort of tradition of recommendation, of databases being sent something saying, we're sending you this as a recommendation of this event or something like that. And I mean, I think, sort of centralized box office and centralized data sharing and things like that is still a very thorny issue for a lot of creative industries and a lot of arts organizations and stuff like that. And there's been a nut that has been very difficult to crack in a lot of regions. Speaking for Northern Ireland, certainly that has definitely the whole idea of a centralized box office system has been raised so many different times and has never really got off the ground, because I think that there is a commercial sensitivity and there's thorny issues around it and things like that. So I think we're a wee bit way off that, but I think within reason. Although I'm sure people do share each other's credit cards. No. I think they're called criminals.
It seems like a great system, though.
What?
So sharing credit card numbers with other people.
If everybody knows everybody else's credit card number, then what's,
Go.
Yeah, transparency, I think it's called. Anyway, we're slightly getting off topic now. I wondered, Andy, one of your specialities has been taking large amounts of information and trying to put it into kind of an understandable methodology and kind of front end, if you like. Certainly your website, is it ARA?
I'll do it. Yeah.
You do it. Sorry.
So my name's Andy Ray, which is RAE. So it's RAE.li, which is like Liechtenstein, I think. But
okay.
It's just as short as possible. Yeah, nice. Exactly. You won't believe it.
Well, I mean, I think those are, and we'll share those up when we're putting the word out about the podcast and stuff like that, because they are really useful. I mean, even if you don't have a lot of knowledge about film industry and stuff like that, it's very interesting to see what the power of data to tell a story and to create a narrative around, where we have been and where we are going and things like that. It's very interesting. If you were talking to cinema or independent cinema, stuff like that, how do they avoid drowning in data? I think this is one of the things. I mean, we talked about the objective, but there's also a sense of managing what you bring in and managing maybe what you store and stuff like that. How does someone do that?
It's hard. It's hard in any sense, I think, especially nowadays. We have so much available. You mentioned Google Analytics and Facebook and Twitter, all these kind of things coming together. We're constantly, tracking these and creating information at every stage, and that's it. And that's kind of the problem, was too much. And as I said, we have a lot of things that make us feel good and make us think we're doing well and all these kind of vanities. I do, always come back to the objectives, but I think you do have to be realistic about what you're capturing and brutal and honest with ourselves, whether these things are attached to actually, are they realistic? Are we being lied to in some ways? Because, we were, as Andy J mentioned, the Facebook 3 seconds, Facebook are famous and they millions have been spent with them, but Facebook are lying to us.
Yeah.
Is that going to get this podcast sued?
No. I'd physically fight them, don't worry.
Yeah. So we do have to be kind of brutal about maybe what doesn't work, and kind of, do we trust our sources a lot of the time and think, does this actually correlate with our experience?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned at the very start, we should be, skeptical of data and perhaps question, do we need it a lot of the time? And so much of the time, kind of the stories I've told, the information and data that I've brought up, is often reflected by an experienced person's intuition, and the data actually adds nothing. Which is not a great thing for me to say as someone kind of deals with this stuff all day, really. But we should still, fall back to intuition and, don't waste our time.
Well, one doesn't cancel the other out.
No.
Yeah. Andy, Andy J, you work with a lot of big clients and stuff like that. How do they manage not drowning in it so that it becomes useless?
If it's helpful, they're awful with it too. I work with agencies as well as companies, and the number of agencies I work with, I'm like, look, I see why you've put all of that information in the report, but I promise you nobody cares. No one's going to read your 68-page monthly report. Just send them the first page, and if they ask for the rest, do that. Look, everybody, even in massive organizations with names that you know of, is trying to justify their position or get a promotion or stop themselves being elbowed out the door at the next round of redundancies. So everyone's producing these reports based on vanity metrics that makes them look amazing. So you're not alone if that's what you're doing. That's the starting point. What I would say is that I think if you take the less is more approach, what are you actually going to do with this data?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, you look at it and you go, well, wow, did you know that, 93% of our audience stayed with us for 85% of the video? Go, that's wonderful. And what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah.
I don't know. Great. Well, let's not bother talking about it. So, so to me, you start with the fundamental pieces, and, I have that marketing approach to it. So it's, how are you going to get in touch with the customers again and again and again? So get that information's gold. How did they find out about you? All that sort of stuff. That's really critical information. Then you've got, what do your funders need from an evaluation perspective? Is that questions about their hard to reach groups and things like that. So what information do your funders need? And once you've worked out those sort of 6, 7, 8 bits out, just capture that. If at some point in the future you realize that you do need to know how many times that person has clicked on one of your posts before they decide to buy, from a marketing professional, that's really great information to have. To most people running cinemas or community cinemas, it's not overly useful. So don't worry about it. Do you know what I mean? I would love that information, because I would try to build a campaign around how many touch points do we need before somebody engages. And most people aren't going to do that. So if you don't have that marketing background that's going to make that information useful, don't sweat about it. Don't sweat it. It's fine. Get the information that you're going to use and use that. Because if you do start to put 10% on your audience every time because you're starting to use their email addresses and target them better and send them better information, you'll hopefully be generating more money that you might then have a marketing person at some point in your organization. If you're a bigger one, you might have a marketing person who wants better information, and therefore you can start capturing that. So just get what you can use is the first starting point. And I think we've skipped over the middle step as well, which is work out where you're going to store it. If you've got a box office system, that's doing the bulk of it for you. And I mean, the number of places, Andy, you've probably seen this as well, where they have a database system. So let's call it the box office system. Great, we've got that. We capture all the details there. Great. We've also got this Excel spreadsheet over here, which has a load of information in. We've got that box over there, which has some information. MailChimp, we've got MailChimp too. That's got all our email addresses. We used to use Constant Contact, so we've got 60 email addresses over there. And you're like, right, one source of the truth. I don't care where that one source is, but just have one source, right? If it's MailChimp, just use MailChimp. If it's your box office system, just use your box office system. As soon as you start to have lots of different bits of data in different places, you're in trouble. From a GDPR perspective, if somebody emails you and says, please take me off your database, I no longer want to hear from Film Hub Northern Ireland, you go, yes, no problem. We've removed you.
Never happened.
But we haven't removed you from that database or this database or that one.
Yeah.
You're actually breaking the law at that point, because they don't care that you had that stuck in a drawer. You've just done it.
Yeah.
So have one source of the truth. Ideally that should be a ticketing box office system, whether it's Eventbrite or better systems than that, whatever. But just one source of the truth, please. No more.
Some nervous giggling going on here about that. It's certainly touched a nerve.
Everybody does it.
I keep them all in a book.
Lots of post-it notes everywhere. I'm only
Oh.
joking. I'm only joking. No,
Hey,
Andy.
post-it notes are hack-proof. You cannot hack a post-it notes. Great system.
I'm just going to pick up with Andy Ray on something that Andy J said. And just, I mean, we've talked a lot about the work it is to get it, to store it, the setting objectives, all that stuff. But how can we really use it as film exhibitors in terms of, yes, you can, you know, you need to get certain information for funders. That's, you know, that's a bottom line. But also in terms of interrogating the demographics yourself and looking at how you can use it for influencing program, for example.
I think influencing programs is incredibly ambitious. You know, the organisations we work with in the Film Hub, few do that. Even kind of multi-million pound kind of people. I think it's kind of this lovely dream in which kind of the data and the analytics influence the program in a meaningful way. It's really hard. I think the big access point is really the marketing. And that's kind of the obvious place where evaluation sits, because it makes us better and makes us better at reaching people, improving that way. And that's the principal way, and how we're going to use it, and how we're going to use it to make us better. And the way to do that is to be small, is to kind of start small and just trying to learn brief lessons, especially as we go online. I'm kind of talking to kind of the Midlands members, at the moment, and a lot of them, I'm telling them, don't worry too much about evaluation. Kind of worry about putting on a good experience. You know, concentrate on that right now, because that's kind of your main product at the moment. You need to be doing that well before you kind of think about, you know, and by doing it well, I mean by talking to people and understanding, are you doing it well? Before we start worrying about surveying those people and that kind of thing. And so that's my main kind of thing. Do it small and do it well, and then grow and iteratively, and then perhaps at some point, you know, maybe in 5 years, we can think about kind of influencing program. I've not seen it done. I think people like to say they are, but no one is.
I think it's really difficult, and I also think that it is it's not a dark art. That's not a fair way to put it, but programming is such a iterative sort of, you know, or intuitive way of kind of engaging with, but it's also knowing the industry, knowing what's coming out, knowing, you know, all those kind of elements around it. And I think there's an element where there's such a knowledge gap between people who are being evaluated about programming. I think taste is maybe one thing, and I've seen some of that where take what you might like comes down the line. But I think evaluating existing program is very difficult. You know, sorry, Andy J, you wanted to. Oh, sorry, Andy Ray, did you have more to say on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's about broad themes. It's not. I think it's kind of, don't think about it in specific films or seasons, but in kind of broad direction. Kind of understanding who your audience is, what that makeup is, and kind of what would those people like, and we come up with these kind of archetypes of people. You know, all this audience segmentation that goes on, and what those kind of individual kind of people look like, and how does that pertain to not only what you program, but, you know, how it feels being in your, you know, working with your business, and kind of going into your cinema. How does that feel, and how does that feel to this type of person? I think there's so much more in that.
Yeah, I've been filling in forms saying that we should have more Westerns for years, and it hasn't happened yet. So I'm presuming, you know, my voice isn't what it used to be. Sorry, Andy J.
They'll come back. Westerns will come back in popularity. Don't you worry. They always do. But I think that there's an element there, you know, on some of the evaluation work I've done with you guys, and I'm about to say nice things about you, so be careful. Programming, for example, lots of good things have been said when people have lent on YouTube for programming recommendations, and you know, things like the collective program and things like that, where different films have been taken to different places, and certainly in community cinemas and the independent sector. I think there's a real caution to being led by what consumers are asking for, because you know, if you ask the general public, they tend to just give you answers based on what they know, and sometimes part of the job of independent cinema and community cinema is sometimes to challenge some of those things as well. You know, if you think some of the great films and some of the thought-provoking films that have been screened over the last few years, if we asked people, do you want to see them? The answer is probably no. You know, does anybody really want to see you know, this harrowing film about a really difficult subject? I don't know. Should you see
Yeah.
it? Absolutely, you should see it. So, there's a little bit about understanding what your organization stands for too, and working with people who know more about programming. If you're not entirely sure which direction you should be going, and so leaning on the film hubs, where there's a lot of knowledge there, and saying, look, we want to maybe start to push in a different direction. What do you think? How do we go there? I've said on every podcast I've done with you folks that please don't ever ask me for recommendations for screenings. So that's the end of my knowledge, which is talk to somebody who knows a lot more. Talk to Sarah; she knows much more about this.
Yeah, and I suppose it's about the values of your organization as well, to a certain extent, and making sure that you return to those as opposed to sort of chasing. Maybe is one thing. I mean, a lot of the organizations that ourselves and Andy would work with, they started because they believed in film and they believed in the sort of the transformative power of sitting in a dark room watching stories, and so that has to be respected. It isn't just simply we set up a shop and we're selling cuddly toys out the back of it. There's more of a thought process and a philosophy and a set of values behind it. Not that the makers of cuddly toys don't have values, but they might be slightly different from independent cinema. I don't know.
And that those values and stuff that need to be replicated online with whatever activity you're doing online as well.
Yeah, and that's difficult, and that's maybe something that is going to be difficult to evaluate on the other side. But I think as Andy Ray says, I think it is that sort of baby steps and concentrate on what's doable now.
Yeah,
sorry,
I think
Andy.
so. Just on that, there's a real opportunity, and I know it's really, really difficult. And there's an idiot sat on his sofa saying, "There's a great opportunity. Go out and get bigger audiences." But if you are, thinking of some of the organisations we've worked with in Northern Ireland, showing great films or documentaries to an audience, or certain types of film to a certain audience, you are hamstrung by geography. Most of the time, it's how many people live within a certain distance who can travel to see that film. By moving some of this online, you've actually opened up the potential for a much, much wider number of people to see that film. So you've got to understand, is that something that you want to do? Because is it very useful to your organization having someone from Brazil watching that film? Is that useful for you? But actually, if your values as an organization is about screening this type of film, you've opened the world up now. You can try and tap into bigger audiences there, but you have to decide if you want to do that first, or is this just a crutch to get you through until in real life screenings come back?
Yeah. Quick question, a quick sort of, I suppose, final question, really, around what support there is out there. I mean, obviously, there's things like this, there's training and discussions and things like that. But just in a wider sense, what's out there that's useful?
Yeah, I think we have to mention the main source of information, who are the best people out there, which is the film hubs. There is no substitute for us.
Absolutely.
Hear, hear.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
But beyond that, places like the Audience Agency, people like Andy J, is this kind of expertise that exists to lean on. The reality is that this stuff is hard, and we should admit that it's hard and it's complex. And art managers, we don't have to try and learn every skill, and we can rely on people who do understand these things better than us. Just as in turn, I would lean on programmers who know a lot more than I do. We should go the other way too. So the Audience Agency, the Film Audience Network. We also do the Advice and Experience Scheme through the Film Audience Network, in which you can access a wide range of advisors, which I always point to, because that is people are all smarter than me. And so got to get their help too.
Yeah, and that's delivered through Film Hub Scotland, of course. So information is available on their website. I believe you are, Andy J, part of that initiative.
I am. You have just reminded me. Actually, I haven't done any of those sessions for a little while, but yes, I am, and wonderful they are too. And I think what I've discovered for working in the sector through you guys for years now is that it's such a wonderful, supportive sector. In that, the Brighton Short Film Festival is not really in competition with Film Hub, Portrush, or whatever. And if you see someone who you think is doing it well, ask them. the fan scheme is brilliant. You could tweet me or go through the audience and the advice and experience sessions or whatever, but also ask people who are doing it. They'll say, oh, look, we ditched this product and went to this product, or we started to ask people this way instead of that way, and we got so much better. I'm reminded there was I can't remember any of the organizations involved, unfortunately, but it was on the back of the conference, and somebody had started talking about doing pay what you can afford as a screening methodology, a payment methodology. But actually it was a Scottish community cinema, and had done like a year-long study about audience numbers and participation and different types of people it brought in and stuff like that. And Aaron at New Notions was just starting to dabble into that at the time. And they were so helpful in sending over, look, this is the study, this is what we found, here's the things that we wish we'd have done back then. And that information was gold dust. So ask around the sector. Very few of the problems you're facing are unique to you. So everyone else in the sector's being challenged by them at the minute too. So if you have that, where do we, what data do we collect? Well, ask Hugh, Sarah, and they'll, ask some of the other the community cinemas or people who look like you around the country, and I'm certain they're going to help you.
Yeah, and Cinema for All have some useful information from a community cinema level, and also our own The Bigger Picture has a lot of case studies and things like that. I think one of the issues will be that we're sort of starting to dabble our toe in online. For the last 7 years, we've been trying to get people to sit in physical space with each other. And so we are moving into this. So I think there'll be a period of catching up for the kind of independent cinema sector. But there's definitely work out there. I think the QFT player is a good example of that. And it will be interesting to see as they start to evaluate the QFT player and how successful it's been. Hopefully we'll support them to get that information out there and to share that kind of stuff out there. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your time today. It's been really fascinating, actually. As I say, I am a late convert. Is that the right word? To both Crown Green Bowls and to data and evaluation. So it has been a good education for me as well. So thank you both.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.